Okay, so we're diving into leadership and negotiation today. You've given us this really interesting collection of articles and excerpts from the Harvard program on negotiation. Think of it like a crash course
Yeah.
on how leaders use negotiation to get things done. Ready to see what we uncovered?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating. This deep dive reveals that leadership, it isn't just about giving orders. It's kind of woven together with negotiation in some pretty surprising ways.
Right. One of the articles that really grabbed my attention was Real Leaders Negotiate by Jeswald Salacuse. He basically says that real leaders are effective negotiators. That challenges the whole idea that leaders just command and everyone obeys, doesn't it?
It really does. Makes you think. Why would people willingly follow you? Charisma is only part of the equation. The real answer lies in understanding and meeting their interests. Like any negotiation, really.
Yeah.
You have to figure out what the other side wants and needs.
That makes so much sense. Think about it. No one wants to be bossed around all the time. We all want to feel like our own needs and goals matter, right?
Exactly. And that's where the story of Joe Foran and Matador Petroleum really hits home. Foran built this hugely successful oil company. But when another company wanted to buy Matador, his board voted to sell against his wishes. He was completely blindsided.
Wow. That's a tough situation. He was the CEO. Why would his board go against him like that?
Because he didn't take the time to understand their interests. Most of the board members were retired and looking for a quick financial gain. Foran was focused on the long-term future of the company, but they just wanted to cash out.
That's a great example of how even a successful leader can stumble if they forget the negotiation side of things. He assumed everyone shared his vision, but he never actually checked in with them individually to confirm that. Have you ever been in a similar situation where miscommunication or assuming others' motivations led to an unexpected outcome?
Oh yeah, it's a common pitfall. And to avoid it, Salacuse lays out these four pillars of what he calls negotiation-based leadership. The first one is something he calls interest-based leadership. What do you think that means?
Well, to me, it sounds like figuring out what motivates each individual person. Some people are all about the money, others want recognition, and some just want to make a positive impact. It's a mixed bag, right?
You got it. A smart leader understands that everyone's different. A one-size-fits-all approach just won't cut it. They adapt their communication and actions to speak to each person's individual motivations.
It makes me think of that saying, it's not about what you want, it's about what they want.
Precisely. That leads us to the second pillar, negotiating relationships. Another article in this collection dives into how trust is the foundation of strong leadership. People are more likely to follow someone they trust, someone who makes them feel safe and confident. It's all about reducing that feeling of risk. That comes with following someone.
That's true. No one wants to feel like they're going to get thrown under the bus, right?
Yeah.
How do you build that kind of trust as a leader, though?
The article breaks it down into four key elements. First, there's two-way communication. People need to feel heard. Then, the leader needs to show a genuine commitment to their followers' interests, not just their own agenda. Third, there's reliability. Being consistent, keeping promises, being someone people can depend on is huge. And lastly, there's respecting the contributions of others. Everyone wants to feel valued and appreciated for what they bring to the table.
Those are all really solid points. It makes me wonder if strong relationships actually reduce the need for constant negotiation because everyone is already aligned and working toward a common goal.
That's an interesting thought. And it brings us to the third pillar, finding the right voice. This one reminds us that it's not just about what you say as a leader, it's about how you say it. You need to match your communication style to the person and the situation.
I can see that. Think about a CEO sending out a generic memo to the board about a big decision versus taking the time to meet with each board member individually to discuss it. Those send totally different messages, don't they?
They absolutely do. The memo feels cold and impersonal, almost disrespectful. The individual meetings, on the other hand, show respect and a genuine desire to get buy-in. Remember Joe Foran, the CEO who got blindsided by his board. He later admitted that he should have been having those one-on-one conversations with them all along. He missed the opportunity to really connect and understand their perspectives.
If he'd taken the time to build those relationships and communicate his vision more effectively, maybe things would turn out differently.
That's a key takeaway for sure. And it leads us nicely to the fourth and final pillar, negotiating a vision. This one really challenges the idea that a leader just dictates their vision to everyone. It's much more about creating a shared vision, bringing people along on the journey.
I love that. It's so much more collaborative and empowering. Have you ever worked with a leader who truly embraced this approach of co-creating a vision?
Yes, absolutely. It's amazing to witness the energy and commitment that emerges when people feel truly invested in the vision. And the article uses a fantastic example to illustrate this. Goldman Sachs' journey to going public. It took them a whopping 12 years of negotiations to get all the partners on board with this massive change.
12 years. Wow, that's commitment. It shows that leadership isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. It's about building those relationships, understanding different perspectives, and finding a shared vision that everyone can rally behind.
And that journey requires constant negotiation, both big and small. It's about finding those points of agreement, addressing concerns, and building a consensus that moves everyone forward together.
Speaking of powerful leaders who
Yeah.
navigated complex situations, let's talk about Nelson Mandela. There's an article here that calls him a master negotiator. I mean, talk about leading in incredibly difficult circumstances.
What's remarkable about Mandela is that his time in prison actually shaped his negotiation skills. He learned the power of patience, discipline, and empathy in that incredibly challenging environment.
He even secretly negotiated with the South African government from prison, even though the ANC, his own organization, was against it. He was willing to go against the grain because he believed so strongly in the power of negotiation.
Mandela famously said, "There are times when a leader must move out ahead of the flock." He understood that true leadership often means taking risks and forging a new path, even when it's unpopular. What do you think? Have you ever felt the need to stand up for something you believed in, even when it meant going against the grain?
Absolutely. It takes courage and conviction, but sometimes it's the only way to make real progress.
That's right. And Mandela embodied this courage. He was a master of what's called leading from behind, influencing others to champion his cause. By strategically building consensus and support, it wasn't about giving orders. It was about inspiring action through connection and shared purpose.
That's so inspiring. And it highlights the importance of understanding human psychology. In negotiation and leadership, Mandela was a master of emotional intelligence. He knew how to control his own emotions and understand those of his adversaries.
It allowed him to build trust and achieve cooperation, even with people who were considered enemies. Truly remarkable.
It makes you wonder if we all have untapped potential for leading from behind in our own lives. Maybe it's about influencing our colleagues to embrace a new idea, advocating for a cause we believe in, or simply setting a positive example for others to follow.
Absolutely. It's about finding those opportunities to make a difference, even in small ways. And Mandela's approach reminds us that influence is often most effective when it comes from a place of empathy, understanding, and genuine connection. And you know, it's amazing how Mandela was able to achieve so much in such a challenging environment. Think about it, bringing opposing sides together to end apartheid in South Africa. It's a testament to the power of negotiation and reconciliation.
Absolutely. It shows that even in the most difficult circumstances, dialogue and understanding can prevail. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of leadership and negotiation: resolving those conflicts that inevitably arise within an organization. It's like navigating those internal disputes that can sometimes feel even more challenging than dealing with external negotiations.
You're right, it's like managing those family squabbles,
Yeah.
where the stakes feel even higher.
Uh-huh.
Because you're dealing with people you see every day and whose relationships impact the overall well-being of the organization.
Exactly. And one of the tools that leaders can use to address these conflicts effectively is alternative dispute resolution, or ADR. It's like a set of techniques for resolving disputes outside of the traditional court system, which can be costly and time-consuming.
ADR provides a more flexible and collaborative approach to finding solutions that meet everyone's needs while preserving those important relationships.
So what are some of the key ADR techniques that leaders can use in the workplace?
Well, there are three core techniques that are commonly used: mediation, arbitration, and MEDARB, which is a combination of the first two.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with mediation. What exactly does that involve?
Mediation is all about bringing in a neutral third party, a mediator, to facilitate a conversation between the parties in conflict. The mediator helps them to communicate more effectively, explore different perspectives, and ultimately come to a mutually agreeable solution.
So it's like having a referee who keeps the conversation on track and helps the parties to see each other's point of view without taking sides.
That's a great analogy. The mediator is there to guide the process, not to impose a solution. The goal is to empower the parties themselves to come to a resolution that they feel ownership of.
That makes sense. It's like you were saying earlier about the importance of building trust and buy-in. If people feel like they've had a voice in the process, they're much more likely to be satisfied with the outcome.
Exactly. And mediation can be particularly effective In situations where the parties have an ongoing relationship, like in a workplace, where you need to preserve those connections, even if there's a conflict.
Right. You don't want to burn bridges,
Yeah.
especially if you have to continue working together. So what about arbitration? How is that different from mediation?
Arbitration is a more formal process where the parties agree to present their case
Mhm.
to a neutral third party, an arbitrator, who then makes a binding decision. It's like going to court, but in a more private and streamlined setting.
So in arbitration, you're basically handing over the decision-making power to someone else.
Exactly. And the arbitrator's decision is final. Both parties agree to abide by it, even if they don't agree with it.
So it sounds like arbitration might be more appropriate in situations where the parties are really deadlocked and they need someone else to make the call.
That's right. Or in cases where there's a clear right and wrong, and you need a fair and impartial judgment.
Okay, so we've got mediation, which is more collaborative,
Yeah.
and arbitration, which is more decisive. And then you mentioned MedArb, which is a hybrid approach.
Exactly. MedArb combines elements of both mediation and arbitration. The process starts with mediation, where the parties try to work out a solution with the help of a mediator. But if they can't reach an agreement, the mediator becomes the arbitrator and makes a binding decision.
So it's like having a safety net if the mediation doesn't work.
That's a great way to put it. It gives the parties the best of both worlds, the opportunity to collaborate and find a solution on their own, but also the assurance that there will be a resolution one way or another.
That's really interesting. So how do leaders decide which ADR approach is right for a particular situation?
Well, it depends on a number of factors. The nature of the conflict, the relationship between the parties, the desired outcome, and the time constraints.
Right. It's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And a skilled leader will carefully consider all of these factors before deciding which approach to take.
Okay, but regardless of the specific technique, are there any general principles or strategies that can help leaders to navigate these internal disputes effectively?
Absolutely. One of the most important things is to create a safe space for dialogue where the parties feel comfortable sharing their perspectives openly and honestly.
That makes sense. It's hard to have a productive conversation if people are afraid to speak their minds.
Right. So as a leader, you need to foster an environment of trust and respect where people feel heard and valued.
And that involves active listening, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not just about waiting for your turn to speak. It's about really paying attention to what the other person is saying and trying to understand their perspective.
It's about putting yourself in their shoes.
Exactly. And it's also important to acknowledge their emotions, even if you don't agree with them.
Right, because emotions play a huge role in conflict.
Absolutely. So as a leader, you need to be aware of your own emotions and the emotions of those around you, and you need to manage them effectively.
That can be challenging, especially when you're dealing with a heated situation.
It is, but it's essential for resolving conflict constructively.
So it sounds like emotional intelligence is a key skill for leaders when it comes to managing internal disputes.
You got it. It's about self-awareness, empathy, and the ability to regulate your emotions and the emotions of others.
Okay, so we've talked about creating a safe space for dialogue, active listening, and emotional intelligence. What other strategies can leaders use to resolve conflicts effectively?
Well, another important strategy is to focus on interests rather than positions.
Can you explain what that means?
Sure. A position is what someone says they want. An interest is the underlying reason why they want it.
I see. So, for example, if two teams are arguing over a budget, their positions might be, we need more money, versus you're getting too much money.
Exactly. But their underlying interests might be, we need more resources to achieve our goals, versus we need to ensure that all teams have adequate funding.
So by focusing on interests, you're getting to the heart of the matter.
Right. And you're more likely to find a solution that meets everyone's needs.
That makes sense. Because often, the positions are just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. And it's the underlying interests that are driving the conflict.
Okay, so how do you actually uncover those interests in a conflict situation?
Well, it involves asking a lot of questions and really listening to the answers. It's about trying to understand the other person's perspective and what's motivating them.
So it's like being a detective.
In a way, yes. You're trying to piece together the clues
Sure.
to figure out what's really going on.
And once you've uncovered the interests, then you can start brainstorming solutions.
Exactly. And the best solutions are those that address everyone's interests.
And that requires creativity.
Right. Absolutely. You need to think outside the box and come up with solutions that haven't been considered before.
And that can be really challenging, especially when you're dealing with a complex conflict.
It can be, but it's also incredibly rewarding when you find a solution that truly works for everyone.
So we've covered a lot of ground here on resolving internal disputes, from the different ADR techniques to the importance of creating a safe space for dialogue, active listening, emotional intelligence, focusing on interests, and brainstorming creative solutions. Any final thoughts before we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that conflict is a natural part of any relationship, including those in the workplace. It's not something to be feared or avoided, but rather an opportunity for growth and learning.
That's a great perspective.
And with the right tools and strategies, leaders can turn conflict into a catalyst for positive change.
So you see conflict as an opportunity, not a threat.
Exactly. It's a chance to learn and grow, both individually and as a team.
And speaking of growth, that brings us to another fascinating topic that we wanted to explore today, the intersection of leadership and influence. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. Because influence is often seen as this mysterious force that some people have and others don't. But I think it's much more nuanced than that. In my experience, influence is a skill that can be developed and honed, just like any other leadership skill.
So it's not just about charisma
Yeah.
or being born with a silver tongue.
No, not at all. While those things can certainly help, they're not essential. The most influential leaders I've known were those who were genuinely committed to their vision and who had a deep understanding of human psychology.
Okay, so let's break that down. What do you mean by a deep understanding of human psychology?
Well, it's about understanding what motivates people, what makes them tick, what are their values, their beliefs, their fears. Once you understand those things, you can start to tailor your communication and your actions to resonate with them on a deeper level.
It's like speaking their language.
Exactly. It's about finding those points of connection that make your message more persuasive.
So it's not just about what you say, but how you say it.
You got it. The most influential leaders are masters of communication. They know how to frame their ideas in a way that resonates with their audience.
And they know how to use stories.
And metaphors
Yeah.
to make their message more memorable and impactful.
And they're not afraid to show their own vulnerability.
Right, because vulnerability breeds connection,
It makes people feel like you're being real with them.
and that builds trust.
So it sounds like authenticity is a key ingredient in influence.
It definitely is. People can sense when you're being genuine, and they're much more likely to be swayed by someone they trust.
That makes sense because we're all more likely to follow someone who we believe has our best interests at heart.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important aspect of influence, building strong relationships.
That's been a recurring theme throughout this deep dive, hasn't it?
It has, and for good reason, because relationships are the foundation
Yeah.
of everything. You can't influence people if you don't have a strong relationship with them.
So it's not just about transactional interactions.
No, it's about building genuine connections, taking the time to get to know people, to understand their perspectives, to show that you care.
And that takes effort.
Right.
It does. But it's worth it because the strongest relationships are built on trust and mutual respect.
And those relationships are invaluable when it comes to influence.
Absolutely. Because people are much more likely to be persuaded by someone they trust and respect.
So influence isn't about manipulation
Yeah.
or coercion.
No, not at all. It's about building genuine connections and using those connections to inspire and motivate others.
It's about being a leader who people want to follow.
Exactly. And that's what we've been exploring in this deep dive, the intersection of leadership and negotiation, and how those two skills can be used to achieve extraordinary things.
It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it valuable. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose and passion.